Chapter 16, The Unearthly Eardrum Shredding Shriek. Barry Bagsley gave James Scobie no more trouble for the rest of the week. But it didn't fool me. I knew something was brewing. I could smell it and I could hear it bubbling. I just didn't know what it was. But the signs were definitely there. A few times I noticed Barry Bagsley huddled in a tight circle with Danny Wallace, Doug Savage, and some scrawny-looking boy from Year 10. This was weird, because the Year 10 boy didn't seem to have much in common with the rest of them. What I mean is, as far as I knew, he wasn't obsessed with torture and world domination. Besides that, he was a bit of a brain. I even remembered him winning some big award on assembly once. Anyway, he didn't appear to be all that pleased about being included in the Barry Bagsley inner circle. Once or twice over the next couple of weeks, I saw the Year 10 kid handing over boxes of various sizes, which were hurriedly stuffed into school bags by the other three. Barry Bagsley would then send him off with some friendly slaps on the back that seemed more like an attack than a parting gesture, while Denny and Doug snickered and looked around slyly. Yes, something was brewing all right, and in the homeroom one Monday morning, it boiled right over. Three things struck me as strange that morning. Firstly, that smart kid from Year 10 handed me a note in the playground before school that said I had to go to the office. When I asked him why, he just mumbled something, shook his head wretchedly, and left. The thing was, when I got to the office, no one knew anything about it. The second thing was when I arrived at homeroom. Later than normal because of my pointless office trip, Doug Savage was sitting on James Scobie's desk talking to Danny Wallace. This was strange because those two usually had to be chased up by Miss Tarango to get to class. But there they were, and Miss hadn't even appeared yet. The third thing was that James Scobie was missing. He was always one of the first in, fussing about at his desk, organising, arranging, rearranging, adjusting, readjusting, shifting, shuffling, moving, edging, rotating and straightening every book, pencil and pen, piece of equipment, item of clothing and nearly every body part until his personal world was in order. An uneasy feeling seeped through me as I moved to my seat and looked around the room. Everyone else was present. Everyone except Barry Bagsley. This wasn't so unusual, since Barry Bagsley seemed to have set himself the challenge of being the last person into every lesson for the term of his school life. Having personal goals is so important. All the same, at the sight of his empty desk, a slithering dread began to uncoil in my stomach. What's up, Dick? You look a bit worried. The maniacal grin of Danny Wallace's face made me question the true level of his concern for my well-being. Beside him, Doug Savage stared at me. His small, ball-bearing eyes seemed to have retreated deep into the dark caves of their sockets, as if they were tired of being bombarded by things they couldn't comprehend. If you're worried about your little freaky mate, don't be. He's fine. See? Danny Wallace's finger was pointing out the window. I looked down into the playground. There by the bubblers, in deep conversation, were Barry Bagsley and James Scobie. Well, at least Barry Bagsley was deep in conversation. James Scobie could have been a statue if it wasn't for a twist of his mouth every so often. Then, after what seemed quite a long speech by his standards, Barry Bagsley thrust his hand forward. Scobie studied it for a second, then reached out. After shaking hands vigorously, Barry Bagsley threw his arm around James Scobie's shoulders and together they headed towards the stairs. Aww, that is just so beautiful. Love will find a way. I feel all warm and fuzzy inside, Danny Wallace declared with a quaking voice. Doug Savage responded with a snort. This was bad. This was very bad. Okay, listen up, you clowns. I have an important announcement to make. A miracle is about to happen right here in room 301. That's right, a medical miracle. Danny Wallace paused for effect. In just a few seconds, right before your very eyes, little James Scobie will be given back his sense of fear. And you can all share in this wonderful occasion by just enjoying the show and keeping your mouth shut, right? Then Danny Wallace leaned in so close to my face that he went all blurry. Right. Soon after that, two figures appeared at the door. Barry Bagsley gave James Scobie a friendly pat on the back, winked, and headed for his seat, where Danny Wallace and Doug Savage quickly joined him. Around the class, boys went through the motions of talking, unpacking books, and doing last-minute homework, but everyone's attention was secretly focused on the small, fidgety form of James Scobie. Looking back, I suppose I should have done something or warned him in some way. But what could I have said or done that would have made any difference? Everything seemed normal enough. And though I knew something was going to happen, I had no idea what it was or exactly where or when it would unfold. I did try to catch James Scobie's eye, but he just nodded once and sat down, started to unpack his bag. It wasn't until he placed both hands on the lid of his desk and began to lift it that the memory of Danny Wallace sitting on top of it flashed into my mind. And finally, I knew at least where the danger lurked. But it was too late. James Scobie had already straightened his arms and pushed up the lid. A blur of wings exploded from within. It was like a scene from The Mummy. Arachnophobia and A Bug's Life all rolled into one. First, about a dozen enormous green and brown grasshoppers catapulted themselves into the air, smacking into the windows, leaping past startled faces and clasping their sharp, spiky legs into unsuspecting hair, necks, and limbs. This led to random outbreaks of what appeared to be Mexican hat camps around the room. Then 3 enormous stick insects the size of rulers roared into the air with humming purple wings. Unfortunately, one immediately flew up into the fan. It was slung across the room, hitting the whiteboard with a sickening thwug before sliding slowly and messily to the ground. One landed with a thud on Bill Kingsley's back and held on for all it was worth until Bill Kingsley ripped his shirt off in panic and flung it unintentionally over Doug Savage's head. This in turn caused a strained, rapidly escalating growl to rise from Doug Savage as he madly tore the shirt from his head and sent it sailing out the window into the playground 3 stories below. The third stick insect continued to sweep around the room like a Black Hawk helicopter while everyone ducked and dived for cover. As all this was happening, dozens of big, dark brown cockroaches were spilling from James Scobie's desk, scuttling amongst stamping and pirouetting feet, diving into school bags or flying unpredictably around the room like hit fighter planes. Taylor McTaggart, who sat in the desk immediately in front of James Scobie's, was laughing so hard at all the wusses dodging and dancing around him, but he failed to see until it was too late, the 3 large spiders on the front of his shirt. He became aware of their presence only when the biggest one decided to seek shelter under his collar. At that moment, Taylor McTaggart did a fine impromptu impression of a Zulu warrior as he leapt madly into the air, beating his head and torso like a frenzied drummer. I'd really like to be able to report at this point that I coped well in all this, that I coped well in all this chaos. But the truth is, as soon as the first insect appeared, I leapt backwards from my seat, tripped over my school bag, and landed on my backside on the floor. When I looked up and saw an advancing wave of spiders and cockroaches heading towards me, I scuttled backwards on my hands and feet like an upside-down crab to the far corner of the room. I was still taking refuge there when I finally looked up to see what James Scobie was doing. About the same time, the rest of the class also began to regain some composure and depart from isolated outbreaks of hysteria. They too were looking in James Scobie's direction. It seemed that in all the chaos, Scobie hadn't moved an inch. Now he sat motionless as the last of the cockroaches dived from his desk and scuttled to freedom. Finally, he lowered his arms. Then he turned slowly around and looked squarely at Barry Bagsley. The entire class stared at James Scobie's face. A spider the size of a saucer had spread itself over his cheek and neck. When Scobie screwed his mouth around and wrinkled up his nose, the spider's great hairy legs picked their way across his face before settling like a giant bullet hole over the left lens of his glasses. Nobody moved or said a word. If it wasn't for the unearthly eardrum shredding shriek that came from Miss Tarango, we might have stayed frozen like that forever.